Hey, what's up, Hard Stylers? It's Hector here, the Kettlebell Coach. In this video, we're going to be closing out our 4-part Kettlebell Beginner's Guide series. And today's episode is going to be about how to structure your workouts. So if you're just tuning in, for the last several episodes, we broke down how to choose the right kettlebell weight, how to grip the kettlebell, what kettlebell exercises you should focus on first. And today we're going to be closing out with how to structure your workouts. So if you are new to the channel, if this is your first time here, welcome. My name is Hector Gutierrez Jr. For over 12 and a half years, I ran one of 2 kettlebell-only training facilities here in Texas, where we taught men and women 40 plus how to use kettlebells to build a stronger, leaner, more capable body in about 90 minutes a week. So ultimately they could have more time to do the things that they enjoy doing. So if that sounds like you, welcome to the channel. You're in the right place. And if you need help using kettlebells, building a stronger, more capable body, basically how to build a body in less time, click the link in the description section. We've got a free gift for you. It's a 4-week strength program. So let's dive in. So be sure to check the timestamps. If you want to move things around, you're more than welcome to do that. One of the things we talk a lot about is developing skills. And why is it important to developing skills? Strength is a skill. And if that's true, then skills are something that can be practiced. My background is in martial arts. I've been training Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for over 24 years. And in order to get better Jiu-Jitsu, you've got to practice Jiu-Jitsu, right? There's a reason why you hear professions say, like, lawyers practice law, doctors practice medicine. Like, we never truly master. The pursuit is mastery, but we never really master the thing. And so we want to practice these skill sets. And why develop skills? Because skills ultimately become your default setting. And by virtue of practicing your kettlebell strength training, it will feel like a workout. As you grow in skill, your skills ultimately become your default setting. What does that mean? Well, as you begin to now train, once you've developed the skills and then you begin to train, what happens is, when you're met with adversity, when you get tired, when you get fatigued, and you will, as you start to push and challenge yourself, what's going to happen is you will default back to your level of training. You will default back to your level of skill. There's another saying in Jiu-Jitsu that goes like this: the way that you train is the way that you'll compete. So if you train and you practice sloppily, I don't even know if that's the real word, sloppily. If you practice sloppily, when it comes down to actually competition, or roles that when you're really going to train and really going to push hard, you're going to default back to your habits. So we want to develop good habits in our strength training, particularly with learning how to use kettlebells. And that's important because when we get tired, we'll default back to that thing that we practice the most. So the best way, number one, to structuring your workouts is, especially if you're a beginner, which is what this whole series is about, is developing your skills. Practice your skill versus working out. What does that look like? Practice setting up. Practice your breathing. Keep your repetitions probably from 1 to 5 repetitions, because that's something that's, the volume is low enough to where you can practice, but you can also push yourself. Okay. And also strength is built in that 1 to 5 repetition zone. Anything above 5 repetitions, you're training something else. You're getting more into bodybuilding. Nothing wrong with bodybuilding if that's something that you want to focus on. But it's, again, you're just focusing on something else. And so keep your reps 1 to 5 repetitions. Probably keep your practice in the beginning to about 20 minutes. So if you do this 3 times per week, you're looking at about an hour time investment to get in your strength training, to get in your mobility work, your stability work, your endurance work. You're getting a lot done with the kettlebell. And that was a big selling point for me when I started getting into strength training for Jiu-Jitsu. So everything I ever did athletically was to get better at Jiu-Jitsu. So I tried, running and swimming. I became a yoga teacher, traditional bodybuilding style training. Everything I tried didn't give me that edge, because what was happening was I was still getting tired. My grip was still failing. I needed to take, rest in between rounds. And that all pretty much ended when I found the kettlebell around 2006. And I didn't have to spend a whole lot of time off the mat training, because up until that point, I was investing about 24 to 26 hours per week, strength training, conditioning, flexibility work, off the mat. This isn't including 4 or 5 days per week of jiu-jitsu, some days 2 days per week, two a days of jiu-jitsu. And this was prior to being married, having kids. And I knew, I was like, man, there's no way I'll be able to keep this up once my wife, who I was then dating at the time, like, there's no way I'm going to be able to keep this up if I start growing a family. So these are all things I had to take into account. And it all changed for me when this little 12 kilo bell at that time, like YouTube was barely even a thing. So there wasn't a lot of education like this on the internet of how to use kettlebells. And the closest instructor to me was, I live in Texas, so the closest instructor to me was about 10 hours away. His name is Jason Marshall. He's my good friend and mentor. Shout out to Jason. He lives in Lubbock. I live in Corpus Christi. We're about 9 to 10 hours away from each other. And so there wasn't a whole lot of information on this. So I just literally beat myself up with a 12 kilo. But what was happening was my endurance was getting better. My strength was getting better. I wasn't losing flexibility to get stronger. Just a lot of positives were happening there. And I didn't really have a program. I was just like practicing. I would set a timer for half an hour and I would just do things. Obviously, I didn't know what I was doing most of the time, but I was just doing things. That's my whole point there, is practice certain things. And, I would work on pressing, and I would work on get-ups, and I would work on, swings. My technique was really crappy because I just didn't know what I didn't know. But that's what I recommend, is starting with a practice. 1 to 5 repetitions, set a timer for about 20 minutes, and then just go where your body wants to go. And don't try to do all the exercises, right? I talked about this in our How to Develop Discipline series. We're focused on one thing at a time. So not only do we want to focus on practicing, versus working out, but also focus on building one skill at a time, which is something I'm going to touch on here in just a minute. The next thing you want to do when it comes to your practice for skill versus working out, this is what I recommend for beginners, is using auto-regulation centered training. I'm not a big fan of auto-regulation like indefinitely. I'm not a big fan of anything really indefinitely, but auto-regulation is a really good thing. Number one, it's great for beginners. It's great for a practice-focused approach. So what does auto-regulation mean? Well, let's say you're going to do 3 repetitions. So let's say you're working on your press. You're going to do 3 presses and you're going to alternate sides for 20 minutes. And let's say you do, let's say you do 10 sets. Okay, you're doing a set every 2 minutes. Let's say you do 10 sets. Okay, that's on Monday. The following Monday, if you did 10 sets, set a goal to increase your volume by 20%. So this is where we get into a little bit of planned training. So I did a video on auto-regulation versus planned training, why you would want to do one over the other. But in this context of being a beginner series, I recommend using auto-regulated training. And the whole idea is, if you did 10 sets on week 1, the first Monday, the second Monday, try to do more volume. Try to do at least 12 sets. So that would be a 20% increase. And the reason for the 20% increase is the Soviets, who tracked everything when it came to strength training all the way from the 60s all the way through the 80s, is what they observed over 4 or 5 Olympic training cycles, which is 20 years, right? An Olympic training cycle is 4 years, right? Olympics are every 4 years. So they studied all the data, all lifters, all weights, all intensity zones, all volume. They tracked every metric. And what they noticed was the athletes that showed up to training stronger, that recovered faster, that were getting injured less, they varied the volume at a minimum of 20%. In Strong First, we call this the Delta 20 principle, meaning the volume increases or decreases at a minimum of 20%. So if we did 10 sets of 3, the following week or the following session, this would apply. This Delta 20 principle would apply session to session, week to week, month to month, etc. But let's say first Monday to second Monday is, if you did 10 sets, you want to do at least 20, or you would want to do 8. Right? You wouldn't want to do 10 again. You wouldn't want to do 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 every single week. You want to vary that volume. So a good way to do this is, after you do your 20-minute session, write down how many total sets that you did. Let's say 10. Say, okay, following Monday, how do I feel? Do I feel good? Do I feel strong? Then if I feel strong, I'm going to try to hit 12 sets in that 20 minutes. And I had a long week, had a long weekend. Maybe I was traveling. Really not feeling it. I'm still going to do my work anyway, but I'm going to shoot for just 8 sets, clock in, get it done, and we're done, right? So you want to just vary that volume. So auto regulation allows you to adapt to how your body feels. And there's a pro and con to that, and I cover that in the auto-regulated versus planned training protocols. Is, in my opinion, the not even a downfall. Just everything has pros and cons. The con of auto-regulation is you're relying on your feelings, and strength doesn't care about your feelings. And it's very easy for us to push way too hard, or it's really easy for us to not push ourselves at all. And so that's why I recommend the option of setting the goal for 20. Because it allows you to put some planned training in there. It's like, okay, I did 10, well now I'm gonna shoot for 12. So you're getting some planned programming in there, okay? When you're gonna do the auto-regulated training, here's what I recommend for a beginner. And I covered this in our previous video, 4 steps to your first 5-minute snatch test. I'm not gonna cover all the details. You can go watch that video here when if you get a chance when you're done with this one. Is you wanna eventually start by creating an accumulation cycle. What does that mean? An accumulation cycle is where you begin to build your volume. And that's the whole idea. To get stronger, you got to build your volume. So in the context of auto-regulation, what I recommend is doing a heavy day on day 1. So let's say Monday, do a heavy day. So what does a heavy day mean? When I say heavy, I'm talking about the total volume, not the weight that you're lifting. As a beginner, keep your weight like a medium weight. I covered all this in how to choose the right weight for you in the beginning of the Kettlebell Guys series. So just check that out when you get a chance. Choose a weight you can press, let's say for 10 repetitions, just as an example. And you're gonna do sets of 3. So you're gonna set a timer for 20 minutes. You're gonna do sets of 3. And let's say you do 10 repetitions. 10 total sets. Okay, got it. 10 total sets. That's heavy day. On day 2, which would be like Wednesday, you would do half the volume. So you would do 5 total sets of 3. Doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're taking your time and you're practicing your skill and you're working on your setup and you're working on your breathing and you're working on these things, it's gonna feel like a workout, especially if you're a beginner, okay? On day 3, i.e. Friday, you do 80% of day 1's volume. So if day 1 was 10 sets, well then you do 5 sets, half of day 1's volume on Wednesday, and then you do 8 sets on Friday. So that would be an example of using an accumulation cycle starting with the heavy day on day 1. And then the following week, set a goal to increase the volume by 20%. So by virtue of you increasing the heavy day, you increase the other 2 days by default. So if you increase, let's say you do 12, well then on Wednesday you'll do 6, and then on Friday you'll do 10. Okay, so it just kind of cascades its way down. So that's what I recommend when you're building out your practice versus just working out, is start with an auto-regulation centered approach with your volume. Use an accumulation style planning. Start with a heavy day on day 1 and then go from there. And then, as I mentioned earlier already, keep everything strength focused. Focus your volume on 1 to 5 repetitions. And the reason for 1 to 5 repetitions, depending on the exercise that you're doing, the reason for 1 to 5 repetitions, number 1, is your total, like the duration of your working set will be about 20-ish seconds. Again, just depends on what exercise you're doing. So let's say if you do 3 presses, it's probably gonna take you, 12, 15 seconds. If you do 5 swings, it'll take you 10 seconds. If you do 10 swings, if you do 5 swings, it'll take you 10 seconds. If you do 10 swings, it'll take you to 15 seconds. If you do anywhere, depending on how fast you're snatching, if you're snatching anywhere between 6 and 9 repetitions, it'll take you no more than 15 seconds. So that's the reason for the 1 to 5 repetitions. Is if we're thinking about just from a strength training perspective, we were doing pressing, or even just swings, we want to keep your working set to about 15 seconds. And the reason for that is we can avoid the muscle burn, because anytime the muscles begin to burn, the muscles start to shut down, and it's not going to increase your performance as a beginner. Okay, maybe it will for some it won't. But if you're a beginner, I recommend avoiding glycolysis in the beginning. And then as you go on, you get more experience, you can dive more into that type of training. The second thing to structuring your workout is, I've already kind of teased this already, is build one skill at a time. So I talked about this in the first part of how to develop discipline, that whole series. And the 5 rules for developing discipline, I won't go into much detail of each one. I'll just list these out for you really quick. Number 1 is practice one discipline at a time. So work on, especially if you're a beginner, I recommend starting with the press first and the clean first over the swing, because those are things that you can practice and correct one repetition at a time. Versus, let's say you start with the kettlebell swing right away. That's a very common approach. In my professional opinion, the downside of starting with a swing is you can't correct things in real time, because when you're swinging the bell, like, it's gravity controls the bell for half a second before it comes back down. With the clean, you can clean the bell up, you can pause, you can work on, getting the shoulder down, making sure the abs are connected. Like, you can go through a checklist of things, are your abs braced, etc., and then re-clean. So you can slow things down and you can focus on one rep at a time. Versus a swing where you're doing, multiple repetitions. Sure, you could probably do the dead stop swing, but still, if you can't, once that bell's in flight, like, there's no stopping. With the clean, there's a stopping point, okay? Especially if there's a stopping point at the top. And also the clean has a direct carryover to if you're working on your plank to build your core strength, because the rack position looks exactly like a plank. So there's a lot of carryover to many of these other exercises. And again, the real thing here is it slows things down, because this is a beginner guide series. And then it's also going to prep you for your press, which you can also work on one repetition at a time. So these are very user-friendly approaches in terms of like exercise selection. So practice, get your press down. Do that for several weeks. You can practice your clean on off days. So let's say if you worked on your press on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, work on your clean and mobility work on Tuesdays, Thursdays, or Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday, right? So just working on one thing at a time. Why? Fewer moving parts. That's a key piece here. The more simple we can keep things, the more repeatable they become. The more repeatable they become, the more likelihood you're going to be consistent with it, right? And consistency is the mother of long-term progress, right? So keep things, the fewer moving parts you have, the more simple it's going to be, especially if life is crazy. And I mean, we're all adults here. Life is pretty stressful. Life is pretty crazy. The more stressful your life becomes, my opinion, I think training should be more simple. So fewer moving parts, right? So not as many exercises, one thing to focus on. That makes it simple. Simplicity leads to repeatability. Repeatability leads to long-term consistency. Okay, so practice one discipline at a time. The second rule of discipline was dominanta. That's a fancy Latin word that essentially means focus. What you focus on grows. Focus your attention on getting tight, on your breathing. Don't focus on the weight that you're trying to lift. Focus on the breath work that needs to happen. Focus on the tension that needs to be created. Visualize the exercise that you're doing, right? So dominanta, okay? So what you focus on ultimately grows. If you start to focus on what you can't do, if you start to focus on how heavy the weight might be, things just kind of fall apart from there, all right? And it's dominanta also not making tension the sole focus of the exercise, because if you just focus on how tight you can get to get strong, you can actually risk missing the lift, because tension becomes the name of the game. Executing the lift should be the priority, okay? Focus on executing the lift and work on generating the amount of tension necessary to get the lift done. Okay, so I cover all that in detail in 5 rules to develop discipline. The third one is developing patience. The key idea there is do things that require patience, which is strength training in this context, and ultimately continue practicing until you've learned your lesson. That's the key thing about patience, is you'll move forward once you pay attention to the lessons that you're learning along the way. Because if you keep making the same mistakes over and over, you're really not going to make much progress. So building one skill at a time requires patience, and most people just don't have that patience. And if you can focus on developing your press for several weeks, and then eventually adding in the squat. And then after, a month, adding in a lunge or something else. You can start to stack these things eventually over time. And then number 4 is automation. You practice things long enough over and over until it's no longer conscious thought. It just happens automatically. That's where we want to get with our skill sets. Is in the beginning, you're practicing setting up and my grip and my breathing. And you're starting to layer and to stack these skills and these techniques. But after this happens pretty quick, with our students. After about, after the first week, going to the second week, these things start to become automatic. They set up in the right position. The breathing, happens automatically. Once they clean, they get tight. Everything just starts to come together. That's when your things are becoming automated. But that can only happen if you're practicing one thing at a time. That can only happen if you're dialing in your focus, and that can only happen if you're being patient with what you're doing. Okay, so automation. Once you've reached automation, then you can move to the 5th rule of developing discipline, and that is synergy, which is practicing multiple disciplines at one time. Now you can start getting into a very popular method for kettlebell strength training are complexes. Where you begin, think of complexes as like circuit training. You do 5 presses and then or 5 cleans and then 5 presses and then 5 front squats, something like that, where you're stringing and you're doing all the repetitions of each exercise before moving on to the next exercise. But that's something that needs to be earned. You don't want to start there from day one, right? So build one skill at a time, just like you would develop one discipline at a time. The next part of developing one skill at a time is be intentional. Be very intentional with what you're doing. And this was a big takeaway for me when I did 75 hard. I did 75 hard for the first time in 2021, and then I did phase 1, and then I made another attempt last summer, failed miserably. We had multiple vacations back to back, and we got to day 53 or day 54. Just because of travel, I wasn't able to complete it. But one of the key things that I like about programs like 75 Hard is they require you to be intentional about what you're doing. Many times we just go about our day being unintentional and the day slips by. If you're not intentional with your life, you won't be able to get a gallon of water in each day. You won't get 2 workouts in each day. The day will just get by, right? And so be very intentional with everything it is that you do with your kettlebell strength training, especially if you are a beginner. Here's something that you can do to be more intentional with your training. Within each session, choose 3 to 5 things to improve upon. So I've already talked about practice and setting up and breath work. Be intentional about one of those things. So let's say you're doing kettlebell swings, okay? And you do 5 swings. The next set, you're gonna say, okay, before I start this set, I'm really gonna dial in my setup. I'm gonna focus on making sure my feet are in the right position. I'm gonna make sure that I'm gripping the bell in the right position. And then I'm gonna go. And then as soon as I'm done, I'm gonna make sure that I park the bell, I finish in the exact same way that I started. Master instructor Fabio Zunin, he said that your setup is your first rep and it's also your last rep. So that first rep should be setting up. You do your 5 swings and then the last rep is your completion of your setup, right? So essentially you're doing 7 repetitions, 2 of them are invisible. So practice your setup. The third set of 5 swings, you say, okay, I worked on my setup. Now on this third set, I'm gonna work on my grip. Maybe I'm gonna work on my hook grip, or maybe I'm gonna work on gripping at a certain side of the bell so that way when I clean the bell, it lands in a certain position, okay? So this is something that I call skill stacking. And then the third one could be breath work. Okay, I noticed that when I was swinging, I was breathing more at the top of the peak of the swing versus breathing through my hips. Or when I was pressing, I didn't breathe at all. So you're being very intentional with what it is that you're doing. And then once you do set up, grip, breath as an example, then just start over and dial in. Okay, is my setup still dialed in? Is my grip still dialed in? Am I still breathing at the right points? And eventually, as you stack these, you don't get right. If you did the setup, when you do the grip, you still pay attention to your setup. Like, you want these to become synergized, as I mentioned earlier. But that's an example of being very intentional with what you're doing. And as you're doing that, one, you're growing in knowledge, okay? You're growing in wisdom. You're growing in awareness of what it is that you're doing. You're getting better. You're building your skills, you're building your default settings. All of that's happening in 20 minutes. So not only are you getting in a workout, but you're actually growing as a person. You're growing in discipline simply by virtue of being intentional with what it is that you're doing. Okay, I covered this in more detail. I gave you actual examples of this in a previous episode here on the channel. It's called Inside the Double Kettlebell Jerk. I'll link that either here in the corner or in the description section so you can check that out and see what it looks like in real time and get my thoughts and what I'm thinking when I'm doing that. You can check that out. But I talked about, in that video, I talked about how I recommend gripping the kettlebell, particular for double kettlebell jerk. How I recommend breathing. I talked about biomechanical breath matching versus anatomical breath matching. I talked about hard style kettlebell training versus kettlebell sport double jerk training. So I kind of juxtapose those two and give you my feedback on those. So I cover that in that video. Check that out whenever you get a chance. And ultimately what you do is you rinse and repeat these things until they're automated, right? Which is the fourth rule of discipline. And the third rule, the third way to approach your strength training as a beginner is follow a training calendar. What does that look like? In a previous video, I talked about the proper of time. I talked about ordinary time versus on-mission training and what that means. So I align like our training in our training calendar for our students and even for myself according to the church calendar. So the church has a particular calendar that it follows. It's got ordinary time. It's got certain times where we're going through feast days. And essentially, like, on-mission training is when you've got a laser-specific goal and I really need to dial things in. This is where you would be in more like planned training protocol. Like, I'm really working on my press and I'm following this much volume at this intensity. I'm training 3 days per week and I'm doing this. Or I'm dialing in my eating strategy. I'm really focusing on hitting my numbers. Like, everything is being planned according to the numbers. But as I mentioned, you can't stay there indefinitely. You can't just do training only planned by the numbers indefinitely, and you can't do training indefinitely, auto-regulated and just listening to your feelings. We need a balance of both. It's not always either or, but it's more of a both and, okay? And so on-mission training is planned, focused training by the numbers, essentially. And then we have what we call ordinary time. Ordinary time training is more that auto-regulated, more chill, more laid back. But what we're doing in that ordinary time is we're building skills. Where you can practice grease the groove techniques. You can work on developing new skills. Like, okay, I just worked on my press and my squat for 8 weeks, 12 weeks. I want to learn how to snatch. Or I want to work on cleaning up my snatch. I want to do the snatch test. Like, you have other skills that you want to develop, other disciplines that you want to develop. Lifestyle focused eating. Like, how can I eat in a way where I stay within a general target, like a general number, but I want to be able to enjoy things on Saturday night or Friday night or Sunday night. Like, how can I plan that in and still stay in line with what it is that I'm trying to do, like with my health and my fitness, right? And developing a new discipline. So that's kind of what ordinary time is all about. It's about skill development. It's about development of new disciplines. And I talk all about it in ordinary time versus on-mission training, but this is something that I do for myself. This is something that I do for all of our students in our Hardstyle Academy, Kettlebell Club, that we've been doing for, now 14 years in total, right? So we've been developing this system over time. But when you have a training calendar, you can really start to plan things out on a macro level. Just think about it this way. In sports and athletics, we have seasons of training. You've got the off season, you've got spring training, you've got the playoffs. Like, you got these different times. In each one of these stages, you're doing something different. In the off season, you're not, going gung-ho all the way because you just did that for, look at Major League Baseball, like 6 months of playing, 6 months of playing and being on the road. You can't keep that up indefinitely. So off season is you're going to clean things up. You're going to work on your mobility, your recovery, your strength training, getting stronger for next season. You're going to work on some other things. And then come spring training, you're going to start to ramp things up. And then you're in season, you're going at it, you're training really hard, and then cycle repeats. Exact same idea here. So if you're a beginner, start to think about how can I plan my training according to the seasons? Well, if it's winter time, maybe I want to follow more glycolytic focused training. Why? Because that's usually the time of year when you're going to have more yummier foods, right? We've got Halloween and Thanksgiving and Christmas parties and New Year. So you're probably going to be indulging more in some yummy foods and some drinks. Well, what if we cranked up your metabolism by training in a complex style of training to really crank things up so that way you're kind of burning calories, if you will, more often, okay? And that might not be the scientific term to it, but you get the idea. Is we can start to plan your training like, okay, every winter, which is when I know I tend to gain weight or what have you, but we're going to have yummy foods. Well, I'm going to train this way to kind of balance things out. And then in the spring, I'm going to work on building maximum strength. I'm going to work on building my press or my squat, what have you. And then summertime for the beach, I'm going to work on more cardio focused stuff. I'm going to work on swings and snatching because I want to look better for the beach or whatever goal it is that you have. The whole point here is develop and follow a training calendar. We've got one very specific that we teach our students, something very specific that I follow, and that helps you to maintain consistency, and you start to know what to expect, and you can adapt things for your current lifestyle. Like if you know that you're traveling or what have you, you're going to plan training this particular way. Maybe you're going to do more single kettlebell work during the summertime because you're traveling maybe. So single kettlebell work would make more sense because you've got fewer moving parts. You only need one bell. You take it with you. You clock in, you clock out, you get the work done. You can tailor this to your lifestyle is my whole point here. And so just to recap, those are the three things if you're a beginner to structuring your workout. Number one is practice for skill versus working out. Number two, build one skill at a time. And number three, follow a training calendar. So the results of this approach is training becomes more enjoyable, if you will. And you can start to develop a more consistent routine to what it is that you're doing. You're able to train for longevity. That's a big one. I mean, if you're 40 plus, the name of the game is longevity, not I love barbell deadlifting, doing snatches, but it's not, at the end of the day, it's not, can I do 300 snatches in a session? It's, can I snatch well and not be broken or banged up the next day? Can I go and play baseball with my son for 2 hours right after this double kettlebell session? Like I just had that the other day. My son and I went and played 2 hours of baseball. He was closing out his baseball season. And every time he and I go out and we hit the park, we're out there for 2 hours. And just the other day, I finished a heavy double kettlebell jerk session. I'm on I've got a goal with my double jerk right now. And I finished a heavy session where I was doing, double 36, double 40 kilo jerks for, I think it was about a half-hour session, and it was tough. But as soon as I was done, immediately I rinsed off, and we head out to the park, and I was able to play 2 hours of baseball. Longevity is the name of the game. And it's going to give you more time to do ultimately what you enjoy. If you're doing a 20-minute practice 3 days per week, that's 1 hour per week. Like we've got 1 hour per week that we can dedicate to our health and fitness, right? So ultimately, you're getting everything in at one time. Like I mentioned, strength, endurance, mobility, flexibility work. You're getting all that done in 20 minutes. So it's ultimately going to give you more time to do what it is that you enjoy doing. That was a big selling point for our students when they considered working with us at Hardstyle. Was our sessions were 30 minutes, 3 times per week. That's it. Our customers for over 12 years, we're going on 14 years now, pretty much built their life around Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 5 o'clock to 5:30. They're just a big selling point. And so ultimately you have more time to do what it is that you enjoy doing. And here's a great thing. This is a little invisible strategy here that you may not be aware of. If you follow this channel long enough, you hear me talk about it. I talk about this concept of upstream strength strategies. I got this idea from Dan Heath. He wrote a book called Upstream. And the whole premise of the book is how to solve problems before problems have an opportunity to present themselves. And it's not the same thing as like being proactive. It's further upstream, thinking further upstream from that, and the downstream effects are profound. So for instance, let's say a swimming pool. Well, just having a life raft at a swimming pool is proactive, okay? Having a life, someone falls in, they're drowning, you throw them a life raft. That's being proactive. Hey, we're being proactive, we've got a life raft. Thinking further upstream would be to teach that young kid how to swim. That's for thinking further upstream, right? So I bring that up because what I just shared with you today is upstream thinking, upstream strength strategies. So when you follow developing one skill at a time, when you follow practicing versus working out, when you follow developing a training calendar, you're preparing yourself to overcome potential obstacles that could present themselves, but they won't because you looked further upstream to solve potential problems before they could happen. And so if you practice versus working out, you're not going to get injured, the second, third week. The likelihood, disclaimer, the likelihood of you getting injured is going to be very small, okay? If you build one skill at a time, training becomes more enjoyable, you're going to be more consistent, things are going to be more repeatable. That leads to better progress versus trying to go all in, and work out for an hour a day. You see how that can create problems. Following a training calendar, knowing, okay, this is when I know that I'm traveling with family during the summertime, here's how I'm going to plan my training here. So instead of trying to do 3 days per week, I'm going to do 2 days per week, and that's going to be single kettlebell work. Like all that removes potential obstacles before they can even happen. So in a sense, you are improving your performance and you are improving your results before training even happens. So that's the whole idea around upstream strength strategies that we talk about here, because it's those invisible pieces that allow our students to see really great results. So that's all I got for you today. If what I shared with you today helped you out in any way, be sure to subscribe to the channel, click the like button, turn on notifications for our next upcoming video here on the channel, and I'll see you on the next episode.